Hi, Nick from Patchwerks here, and today I want to talk about the Eventide Misha. As you can see, it's actually a Eurorack module, which we mostly know Eventide for their excellent track records of rack effects unit and effects pedals, such as one of my personal favorites, the Space. But now we actually have something sort of out of left field, and I'm actually loving it. It's the Eventide Misha. As you can see, kind of reminiscent to me of Conductive Labs Noodler, insofar as we get this sort of circular display, or the display with the circle on that shows you your intervals, and they kind of express similar things, which is to make music theory a little bit easier. Technically, this is a sequencer, but I do appreciate how hands-on it is. The way that I'm using it today is paired with the JD08 by Roland. That's right. Out here we have MIDI type A, so we have our adapter going to the JD08, and that allows us to use the beautiful sounds of the JD08 with the simplicity of music theory that the Misha provides. So how does the Misha work? You see these buttons down here? They don't look like a keyboard at all, and that's because it isn't really a keyboard. It shows you intervals. And we have a couple of knobs here, a couple of buttons that are user assignable, and if we were going to use this with a Eurorack system, we get 1, 2, 3 CV and gate outs, as well as inputs for augmenting the sort of scale quality, intervals, etc. If you don't have an oscillator, it actually does provide an audio out, which is a very basic tone, but at least that kind of helps you envision what it should sound like before it starts driving either oscillators or external MIDI gear. But first, let's just see what it's all about. This button here is 0. So when I hit 0, and you could see that on our screen there is a circle that is lit, that just means it's going to play the same exact note. In terms of this, we're thinking in intervals. So 0 means no interval change. Whatever note it's playing, play the same note. So by that same sort of thought, if I hit -1, it's going to start going down our circle by not semitones, not half tones, but it's going to be in key. So I'm in an E major scale right now, so I'm going to hit -1. Awesome. And it just keeps on going down. And it's pretty cool because it's always in key, and that's just like we're practicing scales. It's sort of musical, but when I just start randomly pushing interval buttons, that's where we're able to sort of hear something musical happen without actually knowing what's happening. We just have a general idea how much I want to go up and how much I want to go down, so. So I had no idea what I was doing there, but it sounded pretty musical. And usually I like to do this, especially in Eurorack, where I will pick a scale. Usually I'm using C minor. This particular unit has tons of scales, and you can use Scala to define your own scales in there, especially since we are using, if we use it with Eurorack modular, we can actually do like things that aren't in the 12-tone scale, which is amazing. So when I scroll through this, you can see we have like 48 equal divisions of an octave, which is kind of insane. 31 quarter tones, really awesome for doing things that are not going to be stuck to those 12 notes, microtonal stuff. So what do these other buttons do? Okay, sure. Like if I hit this, these are definable, but when it comes out fresh out the box, these are octaves. And this allows us then to go up chromatically, which allows it to get off key. This knob changes the particular which note the key is homed in on. So really, really, really easy just to start playing around with different scales, dial it in, sync it up with your different other sequencers. Some of the menu system stuff is pretty cool. Like if I hold down this button here, you could see it says setup, and then when I click on that, this is where I can actually define what those buttons do. So there's a check mark there. If I click this button, we can redefine what user function 1 does. As I said, it was going down an octave, but we can let's just do random interval. Okay, so now when I hit this, it's just gonna kind of give me something, it's gonna be random. Which is cool. Easily definable. Same thing with the CV and gates, which I'll show soon. But why I wanted to pair this with MIDI gear, and what's really cool about this is it actually does have a chord mode. So if I hold this up button here and select these are my different chord types. So you can see octaves, it's just going to give you an octave. Third, sixth, triads, triad 2, different sort of shapes of triads, jazz chords, Copeland, wide. So let's just do triad, and now. So again, super duper easy. It allows us to get chords running fast. Again, I'm using the roll-in because I think it sounds pretty cool. I love how orchestral the JD08 can sound. And if I'm doing chords in Eurorack, either I want to use something that is digital just to get those chords easily tuned. I do like the sound of analog oscillators tuned in chords, but for this video, I just want to make my life a little bit easier there. So that's the chords. Great. We see this, so I called this a sequencer, but I really didn't do any sequencing. So how does sequencing work on this? It uses something called a tone row. And the way they describe the tone row is that, based on this particular scale here, that we are creating, it's like a way that composers would make motifs. We're not going to repeat notes. So, if we have a 12-tone scale, there could be up to 12 steps, and none of those steps are notes that have been played before. So using that sort of idea, what I'm going to do is clear our chord mode and record a tone row. I hit record and I'll start playing intervals. And this is smart enough, since again, this isn't a keyboard, this is smart enough to not allow us to reuse tones, even if like the intervals made it such that I would overlap with the tone. So, okay, so that was pretty fast, but as you see, I used up all my tones and then it immediately starts playing. So when I did that kind of fast, let's try that again, because what do I have, like 7 notes? We'll just do 1, 2, 3, 4, and just hit play. So we've created that motif, we created that tone row, and let's add our chord again. So yeah, you saw that it went there and I started playing around with the chord mode. So it's just really easy. That's how you would use it as a sequencer. And then I'm not gonna go too in depth with this except show you one example, but then the XYZ can further augment that. You could change how it plays back. You can have it be random, and you could really start playing around with the sort of unit itself, because we have our tone row going. These buttons down here change the divisions. So it's not doing those interval changes, but you saw while I was jamming there that I was using my user buttons to actually change the intervals. And one thing here that I will do is that I actually changed my function 1 to be random interval instead of octave down. So now when we play it again. So we could use these buttons now to actually do those sort of interval stuff if we define them the way we want to. Okay, so the last thing I want to show you is I have a few patch cables here, and I'm going to be using the Rainier. There is this mode. I'll go into the menu here. So setup, CV inputs. So CVX, so X, Y, Z. You could define the range. So if your range is 0 to 5, -5 to 5, you can refine that in the unit itself. But this linking thing is interesting. It sets to linked trigger. So what does that mean? Well, first, let's just see what happens when I trigger. So I'll take my patch cord, plug it in there, and off the Rainier I just have a square wave going. So this should do something pretty predictable. It's triggering the note, but it's going pretty high. So first what I'll show you is actually how to change how high it goes. I hit down there and I have these other menus, so I could say, hey, don't go above a B6. Cool, I like that. But it's always going down and I don't have any other control voltage that's changing that. So I'll unplug this so I could explain what's going on here. That's where the CV in actually helps us out. So I'll again go into my menu, I will go into CV inputs, CVX, and then let's look at our trigger mapping. So when I go into my trigger mapping, you can see here if I start scrolling through these, we have 11 different trigger points. And that means that every time I get a trigger and a CV comes in, that it will do this particular action. So when I have a voltage, and the voltage, you'd have to reference the manual here, but if I have a voltage range of 0 to 5, if you divide that by 11, those are your different CV indexing points. So if I give it a voltage of 0, it's actually going to be moving the pitch down 5 in the interval. And then, you know, if I have a number of 6, which again, I don't know what 6 over 11 is, but will be your times 5. That would be the voltage that you would feed it. So let's try this again. But this time, I will just use my duet, which will just give me a static voltage, and you'll kind of see that now I could use this particular knob to play around with those intervals while triggering it. So I will trigger it. Oops, wrong. And I will take this, run it in. So now you can actually see this light up, and now that's the CV action that is latched. So now it's +1, 0. Let's get this running a little bit faster. Again, since it's essentially in key, or not essentially, it is in key, whatever we're playing is always going to sound nice and musical. And so now, back to 0, that's a -5 interval. We're going to use our Rainier, which has another LFO, and create another sort of random sequence. And it's just really cool to me because it isn't that like the CV in actually it's transposing it, but in this sort of more esoteric way. I'm used to quantizers where voltages are being quantized to a particular note. This is the voltage sort of either pushes up or down. Again, this isn't a keyboard, we're moving intervals, so the CV kind of acts in that same way. And I just think that's really fascinating, interesting. And then allows us to start playing around with our synthesizer, you know. And jam with other people too. If they give you a key, you can just go to town and start jamming. Very beautiful. Well, thanks for checking out the Misha with me. If you ever have any questions, feel free to reach out, and happy patching.